In this section, we're going to talk about an index called the Human Development Index, which is used to measure um, the level of development. And it's sort of an alternative, or maybe you can consider it like a supplement to just using income per capita. And then later on, we're going to then start looking at the other two components of this index. Okay, so what does this index have in it? Well, simply, I'll expand on it a little bit more. It looks at health, education, and standard of living measured monetarily. So that would be life expectancy at birth, and then average education level. It actually looks at two different averages. And then we look at the standard of living measured by the gross national product per capita. Okay, so in this section, we're going to learn how to calculate it, what it means. We'll look at a few numbers, and then later on we'll come back and we'll start looking at, well, what can countries do to boost education, and what can they do to boost health. Okay, so this is what we're looking at here. So the Human Development Index, there's a Human Development report that comes out every year. I've given you a link to this report if you want to go look at data. And the Mahbub ul Haq is the founder of this report. So he is, I believe he's a Pakistani-born economist who came up with this idea that we should look a little bit wider than just income, and we should also consider these other factors. Namely, we should consider health and education. And so he came up with this idea. It also incorporates Amartya Sen's idea about human development as well. Okay, so what we're going to do is calculate geometric mean. The math of it's not going to be all that important. I will show you how to calculate it, and I will expect that you kind of understand the basic idea of calculating it, but that's not the focus. The focus is understanding what does it tell us, what does it mean. So we're looking at life expectancy. So life expectancy is used as a proxy for health. Okay, some of you say, well, yeah, but there's a lot of other things involved in health, but this life expectancy number kind of incorporates all of them. So it definitely incorporates two ends of health. It incorporates health for babies and young children, because if infant mortality is high, then life expectancy won't be very high, because you're going to have a lot of people with a very, very short life. And so this will lower the average way down. Okay, so it incorporates countries which have very high rates of infant mortality and child mortality. It also would incorporate if a country either had lots and lots of so-called lifestyle diseases amongst older people, or didn't have a very good healthcare system. It's also going to show up there, because people won't live quite as long as they could, assuming when they get into the older years. And it potentially could also include some kind of issues in between. So for example, the countries that had big high rates of HIV and AIDS, then their life expectancies went way down, because they had a lot of people dying in the Middle Ages, which isn't actually very common. They had a lot of people dying, let's say, from their 20s to their 50s, which is an age which is pretty safe in most places. And so this was also show up in life expectancy. So it incorporates lots of different aspects of health. And then education. So education, they include two different measures. So one of them is the mean years of schooling. So right now, of the adults, what percentage of them, how far did they go in school on average, right? But that's not quite enough, because that captures history, right? So for adults who are quite old, then the education system may not have been the same as it is now when they were young. And so that's more reflecting historical development rather than current development, although it's an important part of looking at your current labor force. So they also use expected years of schooling. So given the current trends, how many years on average do you expect today's young people to finish? Okay. And then finally, it uses per capita GNI, which is also adjusted for PPP. So remember, we learned about gross national product. This is based on those numbers, which in most countries is very similar to GDP numbers, depending on a few factors. So this map shows a map of human development levels. This is a map's a few years old, but basically where you see the dark green, that's the highest level in terms of these three different indicators. And then as the green gets lighter and turns into yellow, and then eventually orange and black, then that is the lowest level of human development in terms of, again, measured in terms of life expectancy, education, and standard of living, economic standard of living. Okay, so we can see this kind of fits pretty. It's going to track on average. It's going to track pretty closely to the income numbers, but we're going to find out later on there are some pretty big exceptions to that. So let's continue on with this.